The Tony Hawk series is nowhere near as accessible as it used to be. Yes, if you have a modern console or a decent PC, you can buy the 1+2 Remake, and while that's a great use of your money, especially on sale, the Remake doesn't scratch that same itch that the Neversoft games do for me. Don't get me wrong, it's fantastic and very much worth playing, especially compared to the last Tony Hawk games before it, and we're going to talk more about it later. But what do you do when you want to play the classic Tony Hawk titles you grew up on, but none of these games are easily accessible in the way they used to be? I've talked a lot about Thug Pro and Rethawed on this channel, some of the most fully featured PC mods for the Tony Hawk games, and I still believe Rethawed is the best Tony Hawk experience you can have on PC. But what if you want to experience the series' history and play each individual title? The bad news is, Rethawed is one of a kind, and there aren't a lot of games in the series that have mods that come close to that mod's level of detail and customization, all while retaining the same single-player features of the original. The good news is, there are options to play enhanced versions of just about every game in the series, many of which feature very nice quality of life improvements. If you just want to get right in and start comboing with minimal hassle and don't care about the other game's story and career modes, just download Rethawed. It's the best way to play Tony Hawk period and is super easy to install. But if you want to experience the entire series on PC, keep watching. So you really have two options when it comes to playing your Tony Hawk games on PC. The first and simplest is to just use emulation if your system is beefy enough. If you want to keep it as simple as possible and have all the ROMs for the Tony Hawk games, you can download PCSX2 and DuckStation and have pretty much the entire Neversoft saga easily accessible to you. Pair that with Xenia or RPCS3 for Project 8 and Proving Ground, and you're basically set up already. And yes, emulation is a great option, and one we'll be using in this video for certain games and mods. But I like to look at it more as a tool. There are quite a few games here where emulation really isn't the definitive option, and that's because a lot of these games have PC ports, and with that comes easier development of mods. As good as emulation is, it's still not absolutely 100% perfect, and uses way more system resources than the now ancient PC ports, even with those aforementioned mods installed. Aside from performance, the reduced power draw is nice for things like laptops and gaming handhelds. I have a Legion Go, and with Rethawed installed, I'm able to reduce the screen resolution and wattage to power saving mode and play for about twice as long before it runs out of battery. That being said, there are scenarios here where emulation is still king, but I'll try to highlight PC ports when I can, even if they're not definitive. I also want to clarify that this won't be an in-depth tutorial on how to set up each emulator or how to install each mod. There are a wealth of informative videos on YouTube for setting up emulators, and most of these PC mods have pretty straightforward installations. This is more so to show you which versions I recommend and what I think the ideal port is, while still giving you other options. There are so many mods for each title, new and old, so I won't be covering all of them, just providing what I believe to be the definitive options. We won't get all of these for every game, but I'll ideally be looking for widescreen support, 60 FPS, simple plug-and-play controls, and miscellaneous other improvements. Also, I'm going to be looking at the exact same list of games that I did in my Tony Hawk retrospective, which means no Ride and Shred or handheld games, besides Thug 2 Remix and Project 8 for PSP. With that being said, let's get into it. The first Tony Hawk game never got a PC port, so emulation is our only option here. It was released for 3 consoles, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Dreamcast. The N64 port is by far the worst option, and that's going to be the case for Pro Skater 2 and 3 as well, and this is due to the space limitations of the N64's cartridges, which means there are no FMVs and the songs are cut down into little 30-second increments, which might not have been a deal breaker in the 90s, but we can do better. The PS1 port is going to provide the most nostalgic and bare-bones experience, and runs pretty much perfectly with DuckStation. But I recommend playing the Dreamcast port of this game using Flycast. DuckStation does provide some enhancements like upping the internal resolution, but the Dreamcast version looks slightly better due to its enhanced textures. Unfortunately, every version of this game is locked at 30 FPS, which makes the game feel even more choppy compared to its sequels, but it's not a deal breaker. Pro Skater 1 is a little rough to come back to. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that emulators like DuckStation and Flycast are around to preserve these games in their original states, and I'd hate if we had no option to come back to this game on modern platforms, but almost every subsequent entry gets so much better from here. Going into Pro Skater 2, Not only is the game a lot better, but we have more options for how we want to play it. Like Pro Skater 1, we have Duck Station for the classic bare bones experience, and Flycast for the smoother Dreamcast visuals. Both of these are decent options. Flycast looks great and offers a widescreen cheat if you search the web. However, like Pro Skater 1, the original releases of these games are capped at 30 FPS. If that doesn't matter to you and you don't like tinkering, these are your best option. If you want the smoothest experience but still want to play the original game and you don't mind tinkering with some mods, Pro Skater 2 has a PC port. There are 2 mods I'm aware of that make the port more playable on modern machines and add things like support for X-input controllers. There's Party Mod, which is a relatively simple install, and there's Cumulative Mod, which seems to be the most fully featured. The problem with Cumulative Mod is that it's a tricky install. By that I mean it's kind of impossible. The links they list on their GitHub for some of the mod prerequisites go to the old THPS mods forum, which was unfortunately shut down last year. You can get some of the stuff you need using the Wayback Machine, but I wasn't able to get everything. I'm sure you can find this stuff somewhere, I just wasn't able to. It's unfortunate because this seems to be the most fully featured Pro Skater 2 mod out there, offering widescreen, no FPS cap, and modern controller support. However, if you're willing to go without widescreen, there's also Party Mod, and this one was a lot more simple to install. Just drag some files into the game's directory, run a couple .exe files, and it booted up no problem for me. The only problem is that I was not able to make widescreen work. I'm sure there are other options for playing this game on PC with widescreen support, but this is the only one I was able to get up and running with relative ease. Party Mod is really good though, and is actually more of a series of mods that we'll be using a lot in this video for certain games. It might seem like it's pretty difficult to get these games running on PC in an ideal way compared to the other titles in the series, and though that's probably true, there is one more method for playing both Pro Skater 1 and 2 that I saved for last. Pro Skater 2X was an original Xbox exclusive, and for years OG Xbox has had very little progress when it comes to emulation on PC. I'm happy to say now that Pro Skater 2X is fully playable on both the CXBX Reloaded and XEMU emulators. Some people may prefer the original experiences of these titles for nostalgic reasons, and I totally get that, which is why I included the original Dreamcast ports and PC port of 2 in this video. But in my honest opinion, if you want that classic THPS gameplay from the first couple of games, this is it at its smoothest and most refined. The graphics are significantly enhanced, and the game runs at a smooth 60 FPS. And the game includes every map from the first 2 games. The best part is that the setup for this is basically finding a copy of the game and downloading CXBX Reloaded. Maybe converting your game copy from an ISO to a folder, and just running it. I'd say in terms of the amount of features given to you and the amount of hassle to install, this is your best option for the first 2 games. The only downside here is that I couldn't find a patch for widescreen, as this is one of the few OG Xbox titles that doesn't support it natively. There was a link for one on Reddit, but it was dead unfortunately. But honestly, this is still by far the ideal way to play to me. I did run into a weird graphics bug at some point during recording, but this was the only glitch I've ever experienced on this emulator for this game, so it seems relatively stable. Let's move on. Fortunately, with the jump to the 6th generation of consoles, Pro Skater 3 not only gets a graphical boost, but a switch to 60 FPS on all platforms besides PS1 and N64, which is practically a different game entirely and one I won't be covering. That makes this game, like most of the 6th gen games, super easy to get working on emulators like Dolphin and PCSX2 with modern features, and they work with easy to find widescreen patches as well. It's a very playable and smooth experience on either emulator, and is a very simple way to get the game up and running. However, there is an excellent PC mod for Pro Skater 3 that provides an easy install and the most modern experience. Pro Skater 3 Update is a mod released by Sudoku from the 10K Rising team. This is a super easy install, just run the exe file, find the game's directory, and you're good to go. There are older mods like Level Mod that have some interesting features like new maps and wall plants, but Update is definitely the simplest way to play vanilla THPS 3. It just works. Modern controller support, widescreen support, easy install, features like new clothing options, and even some tech like butt slaps have been added to the Pro Skater 3 engine. There's also Party Mod for Pro Skater 3, and it seems to accomplish pretty much the same goals, but like all iterations of Party Mod, it's more focused on retaining the exact original experience, just with input and display issues resolved. So there's no new tech or engine tweaks, so for that reason I prefer Pro Skater 3 Update. I tried Level Mod because all the new maps really intrigued me, and it's a really impressive mod, especially for the time, considering it was initially initially released many years ago, before THUG Pro even. The reason I recommend Update over it is because it's not as easy to install, doesn't immediately fix things like controller support and widescreen, and crashed pretty consistently for me. But if you love the Pro Skater 3 engine and want to play some of the other maps in the series on it, you should definitely check it out. For me personally, I'll stick to THUG Pro and Rethawed for that massive overhauled Tony Hawk experience. For a simple to set up, fully featured enhancement mod, definitely go with Pro Skater 3 Update. This mod is not getting super frequent updates, and I would say that's a shame, but if I want the full Tony Hawk experience with all the engine exploits and physics options, I'm just gonna play Rethawed. In its current state, this mod does all I really expect it to do, and that's provide a quick and easy way to fix all the issues with the native PC port and add some small quality of life improvements. Pro Skater 3 is still my favorite classic goal-based game in the series, and this is the best way to play it. Unfortunately, there's not as many options in terms of good PC mods for Pro Skater 4 compared to 3, but that's not to say there aren't any options at all. Of course, like all the 6th gen releases, emulation works just fine for this game. In terms of PC mods, I only know of a few attempts at getting this game running without issue on modern PCs, but thankfully there's our old friend Party Mod. This does for Pro Skater 4 what it also does for 2 and 3, provides controller support, and fixes numerous bugs. All I had to do was drag the files in the game's directory, and Party Mod took care of everything else. Now Pro Skater 4 is running perfectly natively on PC with a 360 controller and full widescreen support. There aren't any additional features here, but the good news is that Pro Skater 4 is up and running in minutes with little to no issues. For Tony Hawk's Underground, it's a similar story. Emulation will of course work fine, but won't provide the best experience. There are a ton of old mods you can find and try to get working for this game, but for the simplest experience, the best thing to do is to install either Party Mod or THUG SDL. Party Mod is always solid, and each iteration of it helps a lot with these Tony Hawk PC ports. THUG SDL is a new project by one of the Rethawed devs, and it's built off of Party Mod with a couple of extra new features. This is pretty much the best game in the series in my opinion, so I'm glad to see it getting some love. You know, on this channel I give a lot of attention to the big gigantic overhaul mods like THUG Pro and Rethawed, but I do really genuinely appreciate these smaller mods that just make these decade-old games run so much better. For Underground 2, the biggest mod is obviously THUG Pro. And while it's a great mod and a super fun way to play Tony Hawk, it's not the best way to play Underground 2. That's because the story mode isn't accessible with THUG Pro. It really just aims to be a fully featured base for multiplayer and free skate, and it's incredibly fun. Even though I tend to play Rethawed a little more these days, THUG Pro is still a really great time and always good to come back to. As someone who's been invested in these games for a long time, THUG Pro was really the first big mod I remember that felt like it was for everyone. You didn't have to be a super fan or install several different patches and fixes. It was the first mod I remember that just used a bog standard installer. I downloaded it around 2014 or so, and it was the first time since I was a kid that I really got into the series again. And considering it runs on a tweaked version of the Underground 2 engine, it just felt so good to play. With that being said, we still need to find a way to play through the, in my opinion, very underrated story mode of THUG 2. In my video about Rethawed, I mentioned the mod Clown Jobbed, which I've used for the last few years, and while that's still a good mod and perfectly usable, I actually use Party Mod now. Yeah, Party Mod is available for pretty much every PS2 era game in the series, and for Pro Skater 2, 4, and Underground 2, it's the best way to play these games on PC. I really love these mods. It might not seem like much, but I remember these games being such a hassle to set up in the 2010s. I'm so glad it's this easy now, and it makes these ports finally better than emulation. So overall, Party Mod is your best bet for the story mode. And if you want to play multiplayer in a tweaked version of this engine, I'd recommend THUG Pro. However, there is a weird kind of wildcard third option. Off the jump, I'll say I don't necessarily recommend this method, but you can play Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix, which is the PSP port. The game runs perfectly on PPSSPP, but always had a 30 FPS lock. However, I found a patch on Reddit that allowed me to double that cap to 60 FPS, making this port way more playable. With a couple input tweaks, I was able to get in, and it felt pretty good. The pro of going this route is obviously all of the extra content that THUG 2 Remix has. It has a bunch of extra levels and kind of restructures the game's order, so it's really interesting to play if you've only ever experienced the console game. The cons of emulating this PSP port is that it obviously doesn't look quite as good, and even though the frame rate is doubled now, something just kind of feels slightly off about it. Animations aren't as fluid, and I'd say overall it's a slightly worse port of the game in general. But the added content is reason enough to at least check it out if you're really into these games like me. Overall, Party Mod and Thug Pro are still going to be your best options here though. As much as I just want to say rethawed and finish the American Wasteland section of this video, this game has a few options. There is a party mod for THAW, which you can use if you want a completely vanilla experience for whatever reason. You can, of course, emulate, and it's actually pretty interesting to emulate the 360 version in particular, because it definitely has the best graphics of the official ports. The PC port seems to be based around the 6th gen versions instead, so it doesn't look quite as good, but there's been a lot of work done in Rethawed to modernize the look of American Wasteland's PC port. They've even added some of the 360 version's models. There's not much to cover here considering I already made a video talking about how much I love this game and this mod, but it's worth noting that the dev team is constantly working on updates, and every time they drop one, it feels pretty substantial. I think it's totally worth getting into all kinds of different mods for these games, and I wouldn't classify Rethawed as a straight up replacement for something like Thug Pro, but if you were going to install one Tony Hawk mod, it should be this one. Unlike Thug 2, where I'd recommend installing Party Mod for the single player and just using Thug Pro for online, Rethawed combines both in one package and then some. It's just such a refined experience, and I'm so glad that my favorite Tony Hawk game gets such special treatment these days. Alright, now we're going to talk about a weird one. Project 8 is a game that I think gets pretty unfairly maligned. I want to say I even went maybe a little too hard on it in my retrospective. It's a really cool and ambitious title in the series, but I do think it was a downgrade from every game since Pro Skater 3. That mostly has to do with feel for me. Subjective tastes aside, Project 8 is still worth checking out, and I do have a lot of fun with it. I mentioned in my retrospective that there are multiple different ports of this game that feel very different to play, so I'm going to be showcasing 2 mods in this section of the video. Some of the members of 10K Rising, the Rethawed team, made a mod for the PS3 port of Project 8, which used to be called Project 8 Plus, but has recently been changed to Project 8 Revamp. This has a number of great quality of life features, but the biggest of them by far is a removal of the 30 FPS cap of the PS3 port. Now, my PC is a bit outdated, and I still have issues getting the game to stay at 60, and you'll experience some hiccups while shaders cache, which is not specific to the mod. But this makes a gigantic difference in the smoothness of this game. There's a lot of extra options here as well. The debug menu is now accessible, there's new physics modes, including a sim mode, and new camera angles, among other things. This is definitely the best way to play the 7th gen port of Project 8, provided you have a good enough rig to run it. A lot of people would say to just stick to the 7th gen port, but I grew up with the PS2 version and enjoy the 6th gen ports of the game as well. Ironically, the version of 6th gen Project 8 with the most features out of the box is the PSP port. It has an entire dedicated classic mode absent from the other releases and a few extra maps. I was able to find a 60 FPS patch for the game, which apparently even works on real hardware. And with a quick line of text in the game's configuration file, I got it up and running. The controls are a bit weird as you won't have 2 sets of triggers available to you, and you won't be able to use the analog stick, as even if you map the D-pad to it, it won't be true analog movement, and some tricks will be difficult to pull off. So I'd avoid it on PC for that reason personally, though it's not too hard to get used to. I was about to just recommend this port with the 60 FPS patch, but doing a little digging, I did find a patch for the PS2 port of this game and Proving Ground on the 10K Rising YouTube, which makes a world of difference. I have a good bit of love and nostalgia for this port of the game, so I'm glad to see it in a better state than ever. So if you're one of those weirdos that actually cares about the inferior PS2 versions of Project 8 and Proving Ground, I recommend downloading these patches. I also have to talk about Tony Hawk's Project Mod, a very, very impressive mod for the aforementioned PSP port of Project 8. Unfortunately, like Thug Pro, the story mode is not accessible from this mod, but this is pretty much a complete overhaul. There are tons of new maps from other games in the series, and even new classic modes are added in, like the one from American Wasteland. Combine that with HUD options, overhauled create modes, tons of extra skaters to choose from, and this almost feels like a super impressive port of Thug Pro to PSP or something. It's worth checking out even through emulation, and I was able to get the same 60 FPS patch for the standard PSP port working for it by changing the name in the game's config files. If you just want to experience Project 8 how it was intended to be played, Project 8 Plus is the way to go. Though there was never a PC port for Project 8 or Proving Ground, I'm glad that they're still being worked on. The PS3 port for Project 8 is really garbage in a lot of ways, and I'm glad to see it in a better state than ever now. As I mentioned before, for the PS2 port of Proving Ground, there is a 60 FPS patch, which is quite nice. It even removes the weird glowing effect that the game has and makes it look a lot cleaner. So for this port, this patch in PCSX2 is the way to go. I'm also glad to say that, like Project 8, this game has Proving Ground Plus, another PS3 mod. Unfortunately, like Project 8, I had performance issues. Technically it stayed at a locked 30 FPS like it does on console, but I experienced some pretty bad stuttering. As you can see, this footage doesn't look like 30 FPS. The mod supports 60, and the game is incredibly playable when my PC manages to achieve that, but unfortunately my rig just can't keep up here. But that shouldn't deter you from giving it a shot. What's here is so cool, and any performance issues I have are of no fault to the mods whatsoever. It's both my rig and it's also the demanding nature of PS3 emulation. Some games work great for me with RPCS3 and others don't. I would really like to come back and look at these two mods again after I'm able to upgrade my rig, and I highly recommend them if you have a beefy system, especially because, to my knowledge, they're still receiving pretty frequent updates. Probably my new favorite feature here is the color boost in the display settings. I'm not too fond of Proving Ground's incredibly drab and gray look, and this makes the game look so much better. There's also some of the same features from Project 8 Plus, like a debug cheats menu, new characters, new camera angles. It's a really cool mod for an often forgotten Tony Hawk game. I will be following up on these two mods for sure when I upgrade my PC, but honestly, it's still wild to me that 360 and PS3 emulation have come far enough to where these games are even playable at all. And as these mods continue to be updated and PS3 emulation continues to improve, the future looks bright for these two unfairly maligned and really fun Tony Hawk games. There's not much to say about Downhill Jam and Pro Skater HD. Downhill Jam doesn't have any PC ports or mods I'm aware of, so emulation is your best option. But the game runs perfectly on PCSX2 with a widescreen patch, so no real issues there. Pro Skater HD has a pretty big mod in the works right now, once again from the members of 10K Rising, called Pro Skater Redux. I've heard that this will be dropping really soon, so keep an eye out for it. I was originally planning on holding off on this video for the release of this mod, but from what I can tell, the biggest thing here is a complete overhaul of the physics, which, if you can remember from my retrospective, was by far my biggest gripe with this release. That being said, I can't wait to see what happens with this mod moving forward. Not to act like an angry millennial YouTuber talking about ET on Atari or something, but this game is really bad, and unless someone comes out with a mod that completely reworks the entire thing, it's really not worth playing. I also don't see that ever happening because it's just a massive waste of time, considering just how many other unique options you have to play the series nowadays. I'm using my old footage here because I don't care about booting this one back up. It works fine on RPCS3 if you're curious. I've included it here because it is technically a part of the Tony Hawk series history, but it's not very fun, so I don't personally recommend it. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2, being the most modern game released in the series, has a native PC port that runs flawlessly on modern machines. There really aren't any issues with the game in its vanilla state, but you can make it better. You may remember I talked about a mod called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater Pro in my retrospective of the series. I reviewed that mod like right after it came out, and though it was still really cool then, as you can imagine, it has gotten so much better in the last year and a half or so. Way more levels from the series have been added in, and the ones that were in the earlier iterations of the mod look way better. The level options here are so customizable, and most maps really shine in the evening on this engine in my opinion. There are also new gameplay features like butt slaps and a very experimental walking feature. Like I said, these are still a work in progress and aren't close to perfect yet, but the fact that they are here is incredibly impressive. I miss using butt slaps in this game every time I play it, so I'm really happy that they're here, even if they don't feel quite the same as the other titles. I'm a bit worried that we may begin to see some pushback on this one, considering the fact that a remake of 3+4 is all but outwardly confirmed to be coming soon. I think publishers need to realize that the kind of people who are going to go out of their way to to buy the game on PC and install a mod for it are also the kind of people who will probably buy the new remake anyway. Either way, this mod is well worth a download. It turns an already solid remake into a fantastic Tony Hawk experience. Sometimes, it seems like if you want to play Tony Hawk on PC today, the best answer is to just install THAW. And though that's absolutely true, I didn't play online or free skate a ton when I was a kid going through these games. THAW made a huge jump forward from other overhaul mods by including American Wasteland's story mode in the mod, and I'd love to see other big overhaul mods follow suit there. But I think it's important to make sure that we can still play all of the titles on PC. There really are some poor saps out there who would rather pay like $100 for just the disc of Silent Hill 2 than just download and enjoy Enhanced Edition in minutes. And though none of the Tony Hawk games are really rare like that, one day our old PS1s, 2s, and 360s will start to fail, and we will have to rely on emulators and PC mods to experience these games how we remember. And I get it, I love collecting PS2 games and I love my old fat PS2, but where the community comes in is somehow making these experiences better than they ever were before. I know a lot of people are hyped about 3+4, and I totally agree. I think it's probably going to be a pretty good game, and I'm excited about it. But I mean, the community never gave up on these games like Activision has in the past, multiple times. Okay, a quick editor's note. I was all finished with this video before any of the 3+4 trailers came out, and I was planning on just discussing my thoughts on the new remakes later. But I'll just say right now that whether or not you are still going to buy the remake, the news that Pro Skater 4's mission structure will be completely changed from free roam to goal-based like the first three is exactly the reason I made this video in the first place. I'm gonna buy the remake. I'm sure it'll be fun, and I absolutely love Pro Skater 3, so as long as they nail that part, I'll be happy. But my point is, we clearly can't rely on Activision to preserve or remake these games for us. Thankfully, we have the community for that. Rant over. Specifically for that middle Neversoft era of Pro Skater 3 to American Wasteland, it just makes me happy to have all of their definitive versions set up on my downstairs PC. Sit back on the couch and experience the best games in the series. I know this video got kind of convoluted, but once you put maybe a few hours worth of time in to download and mod each title, it's so nice to have them all set up and ready to go on your PC. To recap, our best options for every game are emulation using Flycast for Pro Skater 1, Party Mod for Pro Skater 2 PC, Pro Skater 3 Update for PC, Party Mod for Pro Skater 4 PC, Thug SDL or Party Mod for Underground 1, Party Mod for Underground 2 PC, Rethawed for American Wasteland, Project 8 Plus / Revamped running on RPCS 3, Proving Ground Plus running on RPCS 3, emulation using PCSX2 or Dolphin for Downhill Jam, finding the PC port for Pro Skater HD and waiting patiently for Pro Skater Redux, emulation using RPCS 3 for Pro Skater 5, and the bog standard PC port for the 1+2 remake with a high recommendation to install THPS Pro. I probably missed a lot of things, and this video is sure to become outdated in the future, but I hope this can at least get some people started when it comes to experiencing all of these old games again on PC. Your best resource if you're getting into this stuff is going to be the 10K Rising Discord, which I've linked down below. There's a lot of super helpful people on there, including the devs for most of the mods I've talked about in this video. Thanks for watching.